Hello, everyone. Welcome to this part of the series on the ZOOOM Toolkit webinar series. We had a couple of webinars yesterday, one for developers and knowledge generators, and another one for supporting organizations. And today we have a similar round of two sets of webinars. Again, one for developers and knowledge generators, and a second one in the afternoon for supporting organizations. So the ZOOOM Toolkit was born out of coordination and support action funded by the European Commission, which aimed to facilitate essentially intellectual asset management for knowledge generators. Now, in our project, we took the approach of focusing primarily on open source technologies across the three O's, as we call them, so open source software, open hardware, and open data. And the ultimate outcome of this project, among many others, is obviously also the ZOOOM Toolkit, which is a collection of materials, practical tools, technical tools for developers, and also guides for supporting organizations on how to, on the one hand, for knowledge generators, how to manage their intellectual property assets when they want to implement, when they use or they want to release under an open source license on the one hand, and secondly, for supporting organizations, how to support their customers, clients, stakeholders. And supporting organizations is a broad concept. It includes not only IP offices, for instance, but also consultancies, individual lawyers, IP strategists, and so on. So everybody who wants to who needs this sort of advice. And the starting point for the ZOOOM project was that very often it is the case that companies start a new business, and for one reason or another, they subscribe to the ethos of open source. So, for example, developers in the founding team have been working as open source developers for years, and now because they have strong feelings about open source, they want to also contribute back to communities and to society by releasing, for instance, their product under an open source license. But the problem is that sometimes this decision on how to license your product is not very well aligned with the business model that you have. So, for example, it may be the case that a few years down the line, you realize that your business model is no longer sustainable if you were to rely on an open source licensing strategy, for instance, because a big cloud provider like Amazon comes and takes your product and offers it as a service using their platform, and then you think, oh, I feel robbed of my IP. But essentially, this is not a problem of IP, because one of the conditions one of the essential elements of the open source definition is that you cannot impose any field of use restrictions or any other sort of discrimination between different users of your software. So whether somebody uses your software, for example, for commercial or non-commercial purposes, does not matter, because it's an essential element of the definition that you cannot discriminate between these two different types of users. So with ZOOOM and with the toolkit, we aim to actually support organizations in making sense of, first of all, their business model. So making sure that they have a strong foundation and understanding of how they're going to generate revenue. And only then making a strategic decision on whether open source is the way to go for them or not. So without further ado, let's go to to how the ZOOOM Toolkit came to be. So it was born out of a licensing framework that we developed first in the project. The licensing framework is based on a paradigm that we take from other disciplines, and it's called Structure, Conduct, Performance, so SCP, where we study the structure of a typical organization, including factors such as age, size, type of the company, whether they have an experience with open source assets, what is their business readiness, and so on. Then, in terms of conduct, we study their business conduct at the level of the ecosystem in which they operate, how openness is perceived in the organization, what components and layers might exist when it comes to open assets, and then, of course, obviously, the legal conduct of the company, so their IP strategy, how they combine proprietary with open source licensed IP, what is their inbound and outbound licensing strategy. So when you consume open source from the community, and when you give it back, when you release under an open source license. So how are these two strategies aligned? Because obviously when you input open source software, for instance, that comes with certain with this particular license that might impose specific conditions, you also need to make sure that what you consume at the input is compatible with what you release at the output. So is this sort of strategic approach that we take here, and also the legal implications of hybrid assets. And by hybrid assets, we mean mainly in this case artificial intelligence, because we have conceptualized artificial intelligence in this project as a hybrid asset which combines software, data, and other assets that may not necessarily be protected by intellectual property. And we offer some guidance on how to make sense of it from a business, technological, and also licensing perspective. And then finally, the social conduct of the company. So what is the impact of using open source, and what are the ethical considerations that might underpin one decision or another. And then finally, the performance. We also study the performance of the company in terms of economic, social, and legal sustainability. So this is what the toolkit looks like. I would like to make a disclaimer that this is still in a pre-release state, meaning it's still work in progress pretty much, and it's going to be for some time. And our idea is that at the final conference that we're organizing in Brussels on the 27th of September, we're going to release this for community improvement. So we want to give it back to community and say, hey, we have this toolkit, you can adapt it to your own needs, you can continue developing it, and we have an agenda on how this toolkit might continue its development if adopted by the community. But it's all obviously released on a Creative Commons attribution share alike, as you can see in the footer of this page. So the toolkit is really a collection of essential resources, as I mentioned. You can explore tools that will support you in devising your open assets strategy. We have a library of cases, which is a very rich collection of examples of success stories in open source, or companies, profiles of companies that have been successful in using open source in one way or another, and that are proud of these. Training materials which aim to give you some basic training into the various business, technological, and licensing aspects of open source, and also a special section that we have on AI as a hybrid asset. So this is what it looks like, mainly for knowledge creators and developers. I think the licensing and the compliance tools would be of great interest. Probably also the glossary, in case you're not familiar with particular terms. We have tried to make these as concise and as practical as possible. Perhaps also the training material might be useful, and some of the business tools. So we have a very interesting interactive business canvas that should help you figure out the best strategy for your business and the best business model that would make good use of open source assets. These tools are categorized per asset because, again, we're dealing with the 3 O's. So we have tools for open source software, for open data, and for open hardware. Some of them are obviously some of these tools are obviously common to all 3 categories, but some of them are specific. So, for instance, for license decision support, we have specific tools, obviously, for the open source software licenses, which are most mature. And we also have a tool, we reference to a tool that was created by the Open Data Institute in the UK, where they also aim to support people in figuring out the best license for releasing data sets, for instance. The business tools, I mentioned this business model innovation map for open assets, and the license decision tree. Something else that might be of interest to developers and knowledge creators are our business profiles, as we call them. So these are basically typified company journeys. Think of it as some standard scenarios in which we have identified as plausible in the real world. So, for example, a startup aiming to enhance sustainable agriculture with a strong open source community approach, or a medium-sized company which aims to become an enabler in open data ecosystems. So we have these, I think, about 10 typified journeys which aim to help you reason about a potential business model, and you could of course adapt them to your own business model, which might be somewhat similar or different, but still we provide a list of, for example, risks and opportunities, questions that you need to ask, things to think about more generally. And then the tools for supporting organizations, we will not go through them now because they are something for the afternoon session, but they also exist and they focus on the idea of offering open source program offices as a service, which can be provided by various types of supporting organizations. The glossary terms that I mentioned, so we define not only commonly known terms such as AGPL or Apache or BSD, but also things like business model or what is a copyleft license. So, terms that often pop up and that tend to be misunderstood by a lot of folks out there, and we try to bring some clarity. So these have been created in collaboration with all partners. As you may know, the Free Software Foundation Europe is part of our consortium, so they have also been vetted by them. And we have a section on frequently asked questions where you can see we have tried to make this again as useful as possible by answering questions such as how can I generate revenue using open hardware? So what are my options? I have this design that I have released as an open hardware design under a, for example, solder path license. What do I do now? How do I actually make money out of it? Because obviously it's not going to be through licensing revenue streams, because anybody can basically do anything with it, since a solder path is a permissive license. So what are my options in this case? And then the library of cases, which I mentioned, is a collection of success stories, essentially. They aim to be inspirational for you as a developer, as a business owner, to see how others have succeeded. And obviously some of them are unicorns in the sense that we only have one Red Hat in the open source world, and that their model has not been replicated by anyone else. And we only have one Canonical, for example, developing Ubuntu. But that does not mean that parts of their business models, parts of their strategies, or how they came to be cannot be useful to you as a starting company or as an already established SME. And then finally, the training modules, which are grouped in two categories. So we have some basic modules which explain really the nuts and bolts of open source licensing, for example, or some technological aspects of how to start a community project, what tools you need to use, how to manage your relationships with the community. We cover all these aspects, and of course, also there is also some discussion on business models, on sustainability, on how to consult your clients effectively and efficiently, and so on and so forth. So the training modules are really they are broad in scope. And they're, of course, also complemented by a list of additional resources for reading or even full training courses like the ones provided by the Linux Foundation, which are of extremely good quality. And then finally, this walkthrough that I mentioned about AI and how AI relates to IP. So the idea of this walkthrough is to basically force you to think through some of the most important questions that you need to ask when you consider deploying AI as part of your business. So questions such as, do I need to think about the license of the data that I'm using? So what permissions do I need to take into account? What is the status of the output of my model? Is it protectable by IP or is it not? Can I use open source licensed assets to do just about anything? And does my output need to comply with the input license applicable to the training data, for instance? So we try to force you and think of questions like this, which are by no means settled, as the debate and the open source initiative on defining open source AI is still ongoing, and we have been part of this debate and are also supporting as we speak this initiative. A lot of uncertainty, but still we thought that it would be helpful for companies who want to exploit AI in their business to still have this resource readily available. And here is some contact information for us. And now, in the remaining 10 minutes, I would like to quickly walk you through the actual Zoom kit that we developed. So to access the toolkit, you need to visit our project website, which is zoom4u.eu. and then you can just click on ZOOOM Toolkit. We'll take you to the landing page of the toolkit. So from here, you can either go straight to any of these categories. So for instance, if you know that you're only interested in training material, you could just go there directly and you don't have to go through the rest of the toolkit. But let's assume you are not quite sure what it is that you would like to learn and get out of this. So we start with the typical journey of anyone by getting started here. So when you click Get Started, it takes you to our different categories of tools that we have. As you can see, we have licensing tools, compliance tools, glossary, library of cases. In compliance tools, for example, you will find mostly discussions of what the types of services that are provided as an open source program office could be, or this tool for service portfolio analysis that we developed. Let's go and take a look at it, for example, which shows you the typical services that should be provided by an open source program office. So for example, if you know that there is a supporting organization that you would like to consult about, you can go through this list and ask them, okay, do you provide this service, for example, of supporting us to create a bill of materials, or how to manage our engagement with the community. So these sort of questions that help you understand also your own needs. So the compliance tools I already covered. Let's take a look at the licensing tools, because one of the primary questions that I often hear people ask developers is, okay, what should be the output license of what I have created? And that's not necessarily always an easy, there's not necessarily always an easy answer, but we have tried to support them to the best of our abilities with this tool. So if you click here, it will take you to the ZOOOM license selection decision tree, which is a very simplified way of dealing with open source licenses. So it's by no means exhaustive. And since I'm a lawyer, I would always advise you to obviously consult with a legal advisor, with your trusted legal service provider. But in any case, the idea of this decision tree is to get you started, to get an idea, and then maybe validate this output with your specific use case. So the first question that we ask is whether you would like to restrict the use of your software. And as I mentioned, since the open source definition prohibits any field of use or other discriminatory practices between different users of open source. If you, for example, want to say, I don't want Amazon or Microsoft Azure to be using my software. If you say that, and you indicate here, yes, I want to restrict the use of the software, you will get a straightforward answer, which is open source is not an option, because like I said, you cannot do this if you want to release under an open source license. So assuming you do not want to restrict the use of your software, and you're okay with big cloud service providers using that software and providing it as a service through their platforms, we say, no, I don't want to restrict the use of my software. Then the second question is whether you seek to get maximum adoption. What does that mean? Well, as you may know, permissive licenses are generally regarded as the most flexible of licenses, because they basically allow you to do just about anything with the software. You don't need to release your modifications to the code. All you need to do is say, I have used this piece of software, this licensed under this license. I reproduce the text of the notice of the license, and then I attribute the author. And that's about it. So say we want to go for maximum adoption. So we want everybody to be using our software, want to become popular. Then the third question is whether you would like to get attribution when people use your software. And in this case, obviously, this means crediting you as an author of the piece. Now, if you say I don't want this, then you would be dedicating your software basically to the public domain. Now, there is the thing that sometimes these, especially in Europe, these are moral rights that you cannot waive through contracts or anyhow. You cannot just say I'm not an author of this unless you publish it as as an anonymous piece. In other jurisdictions, that's not the case, and even the definition of public domain varies between countries. But these are discussions that we have covered in our previous work that you can find in this tab here, outcomes, where you can access the training materials or the licensing framework, which provide the background to also to the tools that we developed. So say, so everybody likes getting attribution. Say, yes, I would like to get attribution. And we have another question, whether you would like to grant express patent license or not. So for example, if you're a company that has 1 or 2 patents that might somehow, that your software might somehow read on, then you might think of, do I actually want to grant a patent license to whoever's going to be using this software, so as to make sure that their path is clear out of any potential patent infringement or not. And let's say that in our case, we want to do this because some licenses do have such grant express patent grant clauses and some don't. So let's say that we have one patent, for example, and it's somehow related to the software we're releasing. So we want to be friendly and we want to grant an express patent license to whoever's going to be using our software. And then you get to the most obvious answer, at least for someone who is working with open source, and that would be the Apache 2.0 license in this case. So like I said, this is just a recommendation. Keep in mind that you might want to apply different licenses to different pieces of your product, and that's okay. So you might have to play with this decision tree for different aspects of, for example, if you're releasing a library and not just a full product, you might need to also think about that. And also, again, think about the compatibility of these different components with each other and vertically input to output. So these are questions that can't be answered as simply by a tool like this. And then that's where you need to access other tools and get, of course, professional advice by licensing specialists or lawyers. Okay, perhaps we have a bit of time to just quickly go through the business model innovation map to give you a taste of what it does. So we have a downloadable version that you can download and print on an A3, for example, paper, to use in a workshop with your team, or you could just play with it in its interactive form. So, for example, the first question that we ask here is to specify your business objectives. Let's say that we want to generate business focusing on our own open assets. So we have developed something, whether it's a piece of software or a new hardware design or an innovative data set, whatever it might be. We want to generate business value out of it. So we select this. Then in the second step, we need to identify our value proposition. It could be selling the asset as such. So for example, we want to make money out of selling the software, or it could be services related to open assets. Now, in most cases today, in today's world at least, these would be services. So we click on services, and then you get this table, which explains how you could implement a business model using services that rely on open source assets. This can be, for example, the open core model or a package suite. And we provide examples of successful companies and also where the value actually comes from. And in this case, you can see it comes from support, as is often the case. Now, again, this is perhaps too simplified a version, but the idea is to get you started thinking about this, to think, okay, is this a good approach for me or not? And what can I combine this with probably? So we might go back and try different scenarios to figure out which one would work best for your case. And then maybe a quick walkthrough through the business profiles that we have. So let's take this agriculture startup example. What it shows you is essentially questions that you need to ask. Can open assets help me compete with bigger and more established agricultural companies? If you have no experience, because in most cases, these companies would have no experience with open source technologies, how can I generate value from open assets? Questions such as whether sustainable agriculture is feasible without reliance on open assets. So whether you're a user or maker in this case, of open source, and so on and so forth. So you can see questions about motivation, attitude towards risk, ecosystems, and community. So whether you can create a community around your project. So it's really questions to, again, get you started thinking about your particular business idea. And then the library of cases is something that I will probably only have time to show you last. Now, just to give you an idea of what these profiles look like. So if you, let's click on a random company. So this is what you get. You get information, a profile of the company, and you get some basic information, who they are, where they're funded, where they're founded, how long they've existed, what they use. For example, this is an AI company, both contributing and using AI. What type of licenses they use for some of their products, and specifically a description of how exactly these open source technologies have been used. And then just a glimpse into AI as a hybrid asset. So this is what it looks like. It's, again, like an interactive map that takes you from, first of all, we display, for example, the spectrum of IP protection, where IP protection exists and where it doesn't, as you move along. So the strongest monopoly given by patents, and basically the lack of any protection in text or image that does not meet the originality criterion that we have for copyright, for instance. So your product and service will probably move along this spectrum, and you will find different elements of it fitting different categories along the spectrum. And then we go through explanation of whether it makes sense to go for patent, for trademark, and for the different other aspects. And we also match these to the respective step in the process of building an AI model. And just for the sake of clarity, in this case, we focus mostly on machine learning because that's the predominant approach for doing AI today. As progress is being made in AI, this will obviously have to be explored, because the latest approaches actually combine different techniques to AI. So it's not going to be just machine learning. You will almost always necessarily have to involve some logic-based reasoning capabilities, which will imply also thinking differently about more traditional logic-based approach to AI, which are not as complicated to figure out as machine learning. So obviously there's so much more to be said, and there are many more tools that we invite you to take a look at. But for the sake of this webinar, and since we're already out of time, I would like to thank you for your presence and attention. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I will now just stop sharing and recording, and I'm ready to basically listen to any questions you may have.